My name is Caroline Alkire. I am a local artist here in the Twin Cities, and today I'm going to teach you how to do a small embroidery project. If you're not sure what embroidery is, it's kind of like sewing, but the point of it isn't to mend something or fix something, but it's to make a design out of the thread and the cloth that you're using. Alright, so the first step of this project is to cut our Tupperware so we have just a circle like this. And if you're using a mason jar lid for this part of the project, you just don't need to follow these steps. But, so we take our Tupperware and we're using an X-Acto knife for this part, and if you aren't comfortable using an X-Acto knife because they're pretty sharp, I would suggest having an adult help you out with this part. And remember to be very careful with the X-Acto knife because they're really sharp. And sometimes it helps to kind of take it out and then put it back in and push. Alright, there we are. So we don't need this part, so you can just put that aside and then cut off some of these edges because they might be a little sharp. Alright. Alright, and now we have our embroidery circle. So the next step is to cut the size of the cloth off that you want to be embroidering on. So I have part of this big t-shirt, and I'm going to cut a piece that's probably about 6 inches long, maybe a little bigger, maybe like 9 inches long. And we're going to cut it into a square shape, and it doesn't have to be perfect. Just big enough where you'll have enough space to embroider on and that it's going to fit comfortably on top of our circle we made out of the Tupperware. So this is the cloth I'm going to be using to embroider on, and like I said, it's not perfect, but we can deal with that later. It doesn't really matter that the lines are that straight. So this aside, and now we're going to put our cloth onto our circle. So what we're going to do is we're going to drape the cloth over the circle like that, and we're going to take our rubber band right here, and we're just going to slide it over on top of the cloth so that it's going to be held tight on top of our Tupperware lid, just like that. And so now what we have is our cloth with the rubber band on top of the circle right there. So the design we're going to be working on today is a pretty simple flower design, but I chose this design because there are several different embroidering techniques that I'm going to be teaching you. So what we're going to do next is we are going to draw on the back of our cloth the design. So we'll have it there in pencil just in case we need it to do our lines with the embroidery. And then in my design I have some lines of yellow just at the top that are kind of like sunshine rays, and this design I just kind of made up. I think it's pretty cute, but if you want to do your own design, something different, if you have a different idea, definitely go for it. Or if you want to leave out the sunshine rays and add something else, totally fine as well. But I'm going to copy this design. So next up we are going to thread our needle. So all you have to do is take your needle and choose the color that you'd like your flower or your whatever design you're doing to be. Take your embroidery thread, and you can cut however much you think you'll need, maybe just like this much, couple feet, maybe 2 or 3. And so once you have your thread cut, you'll want to kind of twist the end of the thread so it's a little tighter and all the threads are together, And then take your needle and very carefully put it through the hole at the end. And sometimes it'll take a little bit, but there we go. So now I have the thread through the needle hole and we're ready to get started. So we'll kind of use the back drawing as a reference, and I'm just going to start anywhere in the circle of the flower, and we're gonna just poke on the line that we drew anywhere and bring it through. And you want to make sure you don't pull too much where you pull your whole thread through. So I'm just going to kind of watch in the back, and once it's almost at the end, what I'm going to do is tie a little knot so we don't accidentally make our thread go through and fall out of the design. So once there's a knot at the end, you can pull all the way through and it'll just kind of stop there where your knot is. So now we have our thread through the cloth, and our next step is to bring it back to the back of the embroidery design. So I'm going to peek at my drawing on the back to know where I want my first stitch to go, and I'm going to put it right here on the line of the flower. So you poke it through, and then you're going to go into the back of the design and pull. So there we go, pulling, and I want to make sure it doesn't get caught on the edges. And there you have your first stitch. So now that it's in the back, we're going to want to bring our thread to the front again. So you can see how it helps to have this sewing or this embroidery circle, because you have a flat surface. It's always easier to embroider on a flat surface, and you can kind of peek in the back, look in the front, and always have an idea of where you're going and what your next step is going to be. So I'm going to bring my needle back on the design of the flower in the back, poke it through to the front, and there we go. It's in the front. We want to bring it to the back again. You're always going front to back, peek the design, poke a hole on the flower design, and what I'm going to do is do the circle of the flower first. So you can see on the design that I've already completed, we have a circle, and then the petals are around that circle to complete the flower. So I'm going to do this circle first, and then once I finish that, I'm going to go on to the outer part. So it's just poking through, going back, poking through, going to the front. Alright, so I have just finished the last stitch on my flower, and so I'm going to teach you how to cut off the string so that you won't lose any of your design once it's cut. So my last stitch ended up on the front, so you always want to tie off your stitches in the back of the embroidery, because that's where the kind of the messy part is, and the front is where your perfect design is. So we're going to bring them back. Here's the back. Pull it all the way through. And what we do, you can take your needle off of the thread, just kind of pull it through, and cut a little bit of it. Not all of it. You want enough because we're going to tie a knot. So I'm going to cut, put that to the side, and then tie a knot with our leftover string, just like we did on the back when we first started. And make sure it's as close to the close to the cloth as possible. It's okay if it's not right on it, but I'm trying to get as close as possible so it doesn't come unthread at all. There we are. So I have a little knot, and now I can cut it down, still leave a little bit just so the knot doesn't come undone, but you can cut it down pretty short. And now we have the first part of our embroidery done. So for this technique, we're going to start off the same way again. We're going to put a stitch through following the design on the back and pull it through. So we have our first stitch. There we go. And then we're also going to do the same thing. From the back, we're going to stitch to the front, following the design. So now we're back in the front again, but instead of going upwards, following the design and having a space in between, what we're going to do is we're going to go backwards. So we're going to fill in the space that we left in the previous technique and poke a hole into where the first stitch ends and go through. And once we pull through, we'll see that now the space is no longer there and we have a straight line. So now we want to continue the design and go upwards again to go towards the flower. So I'm going to poke give a little space, like we're gonna leave that space like we did in that first design. Oops. So pull it through. And again, instead of continuing upwards, we're going to go backwards again. We're going to go to the very end of that second stitch, push it through onto that stitch. So now we have the straight line and pull through. So it's kind of like going forwards and then backwards to fill in the space that we left in that first technique. And if you'd like, you can use the same thread still, since we have a lot of our green left. You can just kind of start over at the bottom. And don't pull too hard because that'll kind of bunch up the design. Here, I'll show you. If I pull too hard, it's going to kind of tighten up, and we don't want that. So we're going to leave it a little bit loose, just so we have a very smooth, clean design. So for the start of the pinwheel design, what we do is we're going to have a 5-pointed star, basically. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So we're going to start at the end of the stems that we've created in green, and we're going to poke it through right at the end, just like we're going to continue the stem in our different color. So we can pull through, create your knot, there we go. We're going to do 1 stitch upwards, and you kind of want this one to be about the size of the stitches you've already been doing, but you definitely want some space in there, so bigger is better, but you don't want it too big. You're going to have 5 of these. Here's our first stitch. Next we're going to do 1 outer, so it's going to look like we're creating a star. Here we go. Pull it through. And we're going to connect this at the center. So we're going to go to the end of that first stitch and connect it. All right, so we have 2 out of the 5. We're gonna go a little upwards, create another point on our star. And then once we pull all the way through on our 3rd stitch, we're gonna bring it to the center again. Pull through. All right, we've got 2 left. Another point of our 5-pointed star. Bring it to the center. And then we'll do our last one. Alright, and it's okay if they're not totally the same length, just as long as they're close, you're gonna be great. Alright, pull through. And now we have our 5-pointed star. So the next step, is to bring the thread back to the front. So we're gonna go through the center. We wanna start in the center. So we just bring the needle right back up, like we're doing a stitch, and pull through. And now we have, just check your back because sometimes you'll get a little clog in there. There we go. All right, so now we're ready to weave. So what we're gonna do is we have the thread coming out of the middle of our pinwheel. We're gonna go under the first stitch that we did that connected to our stem. So we're not stitching right now. What we're doing is weaving on the front. We're never going in the back of a design for this next step. So I'm gonna bring the needle, like we're weaving, underneath that first stitch. And with weaving, you wanna alternate under, over, under, over. So we went under the first one, which means for this second stitch, we're gonna go over. So bring the stitch over, and then under, we're gonna go under this next one. So we're basically skipping this stitch and going underneath the 3rd one. So you wanna bring it through. And because we went under this stitch, we're gonna go over this one and then under the next one. And what this is doing is it's creating a circular pinwheel pattern within this 5-pointed star. So it'll slowly get bigger and bigger as it twists and become this rose shape that we want. So we're underneath here, this 5th stitch. Now we're going back to that first one, over, and then underneath the next one. And remember, we're not going on the back of the design. This is all happening on the front. So we're underneath that 2nd stitch, we're going over the 3rd, and then underneath the 4th. And as you can see, it's moving outwards until we're almost at the end of the stitches that we created. And we're gonna stop when we reach the very end of all of our stitches. So that's kind of why we wanted them to be about the same length, so we don't have any excess stitch on one and not another. So we're getting close. Let's keep going around, over under our 5-pointed star. And slowly you can see the rose shape taking place. Because it kind of looks like each over weaving is a petal. we've hit the end of each of those 5 stitches. So what we're going to do at the very end of our rows is, it's in the front, so now we're going to bring the needle to the back, just poke a hole at the end of where we left off with the weaving, and then bring it to the back. We don't even need to tie a knot because we have 3 more to do. So we're going to start again on this next stem. So I'm going to do just as I did last time. Alright, so I've just finished my 4 roses. There they are. So we're going to take off the roses by bringing the thread to the back and doing what we usually do when we're done with the color is take off the needle, cut the thread, and tie a knot. So now what we have left to do is I'm going to do those sun rays coming down just like in this design, where you can see those 5 lines in the same technique that we used for the stem. And this one we don't really need that much thread because it's such a short, it's only 5 short lines, so I'm going to cut it a little shorter than I have the last few times. And I'm going to start right at the end of this ray of sun, and I'm going to work my way to the last one. So there's not a whole lot of space when we switch in the back from one line to the next. So for this one, I'm going to do a white thread just to match the background so it doesn't really stand out. Just going to need a little bit. Barely even a foot, really. And you're going to want to thread your needle. We're going to take the button off for a moment. We know that we want it right in the middle, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from the back with my threaded white needle, and I'm just going to push kind of in the center through. And then once the thread is through, I'm going to take my button, and your buttons are either going to have 2 or 4 holes in the middle. So mine just has 2. So I'm going to put the needle through one of the holes, just like that. Have the button resting on the cloth, and then we're going to bring it through to the other side, the other hole in the button, and just push it through. So it's connected to the cloth with both of those holes. And now that we're on the other side, you can pull it through, and all you have to do, you can even just get rid of the needle at this point because you've got it connected, and you tie a knot in the back with the 2 ends of the thread. And let's do a double knot so we make sure that the button doesn't fall off. And you really don't need that much thread at all for this technique. Just cut. And now we have a button right in the center of our embroidery. So I'm going to go into my beads and I'm going to find 2 butterflies again. Here's one, here's the other. All right, we're going to take our white thread, put the needle through it. So I'm going to have 1 butterfly on each side of the flower. So we know that we want them just kind of on either side, doesn't really matter where. So I'm going to put my needle through the cloth about where I want it. Since it's shorter, we really want to check and make sure that we don't accidentally pull it all the way through and lose our thread. No big deal if you do, just redo it, but it's nice to not have to redo it. So bring it through a little bit, then find the hole in the bead, stick your needle through the hole, and then poke back through. And now we've got a butterfly on there. So same situation with the button, you can unthread, tie a knot in the back, and we'll do the last have completed our design. So what we can do now is we can take it off of our embroidery circle, and here it is on the big design. We can cut it a little smaller. Now there's a lot of different things you can do with an embroidery. If you'd like, you can leave it on a bigger cloth and use it as like a handkerchief. You could use it as a dish towel. You could use it as like a doll blanket. There's really a lot of things you can do with it. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut it smaller to a little bit bigger than the size it was on the circle. And I'm gonna put mine back on the circle that I made. Put the rubber band back on, and now we can use it as a frame and hang it up on the wall. And if you have a nail or a hook in the wall, you can rest the edge of your embroidery circle on that hook, and now you have a hanging embroidery.